So if you look at the SC900 course, the security, identity and compliance fundamentals, then this is basically describing anything security that you can find in Azure data centers. And if we look at Azure data centers, then for every single customer, Azure starts by creating a tenant. So if we are going to be a customer in Azure, we get our own tenant. And what we could say about a tenant within Azure, we can say that this is a security boundary for us. A security boundary means that within the tenant in Azure, everything trusts each other. It doesn't mean that you're allowed to do just everything, but there is trust. And basically, an Azure tenant is also named an Azure account. So this is for any customer, your own little piece of the Azure pie. The Azure tenant, one of the most critical components in the Azure tenant, is a Microsoft Entra, or in short, Entra ID. And this is what we used to know as Azure Active Directory. But Microsoft, well, every now and then Microsoft chooses to rename stuff. And especially, well, for some, I guess you get bonuses if you work at Microsoft and you rename stuff. And in Entra or in your tenant, you can basically go in two different directions. So based on that Entra ID, where, for example, where we manage user objects, we manage group objects here. We have access to device information from here, and a lot of extra stuff. But from this Enter ID, you can go into two different directions. You can go into the direction of subscriptions that are used for what we call Azure Active Directory kind of stuff. In this case, Azure Active Directory is shortened to AAD. And a subscription like this is subscriptions that are about, for example, Microsoft 365. And in also another stage, there is this subscriptions that are based on, for example, Dynamics 365 as well. And if you check out, for example, Microsoft 365, then this is where we will find solutions like Office 365. There is solutions like everything related to enterprise enterprise mobility and security, EMS in short. This is, for example, where products like Microsoft Intune live, or Azure Active Directory Premium lives. And we have Windows related components also as part of Microsoft 365. And then again, if we think about Office, for example, Office 365, this is where we can see products living like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, Teams, other stuff like Viva Engage or Viva stuff, and more. Oh, by the way, during my trainings, I use a lot of acronyms. If you are not familiar with some of them, then check out my MOAB website again. And if you go into the learning page here on the which is the third link, and then click the link for acronyms, then here you will see the acronyms that I use the most. So if there's so you can just, if you want to, check out these acronyms at this place. Dynamics is also here, and I have no idea what that's all about. Something with ERP stuff, CRM stuff. Yeah, nobody really cares about Dynamics. If you have the chance to do work with Dynamics, don't just try to find another company to work for. Well, apparently it's good, but I don't really care about it. And by the way, in this course, we also don't care about it. So we have subscriptions in your Azure tenant that are about, well, basically the stuff that we do for users. Also, if you check out subscriptions like these, then the way that we pay for the services is a per user per month kind of payment. Another type of resources or another subscription that we can create is a subscription that has the Azure Resource Manager subscription type. We shorten this to ARM. And this is where in Azure you will see that you can create, for example, you can do a virtual machine hosting, or you can do a database hosting or web application hosting. Networking, all kinds of networking components are here, and more. So the Azure Resource Manager subscription types are more about about the hosting components, where the Azure Active Directory subscription is more about getting our users access to, well, productivity software. If you would compare Azure Active Directory based subscriptions to Azure Resource Manager based subscriptions, you'll notice that here we will pay differently. We will pay per resource, for example, per database or per virtual machines or per storage account or per whatever kind of resource we use. And then per pricing a unit. And for example, a virtual machine, you will pay a certain amount of money for a virtual machine, for the amount of memory it has, the amount of CPU power it has, storage capabilities. And then the pricing unit would be that you will be paying for every second that you run it. And if you stop resources like these, you will stop paying for them. So it's a completely different approach. Um, this course is about both ends. So we will be looking into security concepts is in the Azure Active Directory part. We'll be looking in, for example, we'll be looking into products like Microsoft Defender for Office, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. We'll be checking out what Intune can do, and what kind of capabilities do we have in Azure Active Directory Premium. And then on the other hand, we will be looking into security components that are part of the Azure Resource Manager part. So we're going to check out what we can do on the network level to protect virtual machines, for example. So these kinds of concepts we are going to cover. And next to that, only briefly, but still we will also look into what, sorry for the zooming, we will also look into, for example, how we can relate to, for example, what we can run in an on-prem environment. So if we can run solutions, let's say in Azure. Obviously, many organizations, they also run stuff in their own data centers. And in their own data centers, we run something called an Active Directory domain service. If you would check out in Azure Active or in Active Directory domain service, the biggest thing you can get is an Active Directory forest. And if you would look into what a forest is, well, a forest in on-prem environments is also considered to be the security boundary. And one of the things that we also need to understand is how we can, for example, make these two directory services, Active Directory Domain Services and Entra ID, well, connect to each other. What does it mean if we synchronize a user object from Active Directory Domain Service to Entra ID? There is plenty of stuff that we will be going through, and some security related resources in Azure, they also apply to on-prem environments. So for example, if let's say in Azure we could run a virtual machine. This virtual machine could be connected to a virtual network in Azure. That means that we can now make this virtual machine, well, work with, well, connect to it using, for example, a router here. And maybe we have in our solution in Azure, we may also have a database connected into the system, for example. But maybe as well, we are running computers in our own on-prem environment. We may be hosting a virtual machine in Hyper-V, which is Microsoft's virtualization platform. You may be running your solutions in VMware or other virtualization platforms. An application, or sorry, a virtual machine here could be hosting an application. And then what we'll notice is that in Azure, when we think about, for example, the security-based solutions in Azure, many of them in Azure, they will be able to, well, secure Azure-based components, as they will also be able to apply security, or at least monitor security for, well, remote or on-prem based solutions. And let's say maybe somewhere in the middle, this is supposed to go and look like a little cloud here, like this. That's not too bad. For example, what if we are running solutions in the Google Cloud Platform, in Amazon Web Services, maybe the Oracle Cloud, or maybe some other kind of third-party cloud-based solutions like this, then what we'll see is that in Azure also the security solutions are able to monitor and apply security in those third-party clouds. So there is a lot when it comes to implementing security in. There is a lot to implementing security in Microsoft 365. Now, one of the things that we need to understand before we can actually dive into the technical concepts for or the technical components in Azure when it comes to security. There's a couple of sort of design concepts when it comes to security and compliance in Azure. So before we get into the actual solutions in Azure, we first need to go through a couple of basics, so to speak. So what I'll do is I will save this drawing first. And I'm gonna create a new folder. It is 2402 for February, SC900. That is this folder. And in here I will be saving a picture 1, 01, day 1, picture 1. Let's say a quick Azure overview or something. Let's name it like this. Once my OneDrive for Business client has been synced, you should be able to access the whiteboard. If you go to the MOAB website, the My Course Today section, and then click that link for whiteboards here, you will be taken into this folder. And just a quick check, here we can see that the folder has been created, and the file that I just created is supposed to be here. So if you want to get a copy of the whiteboards that I create, then this is where you can get them. So this is where we so this is sort of the absolute basics. But before we can get into the actual technical components, we need to go through a couple of let's say security concepts, security and compliance concepts. There is if you check it out, there is a couple of things that we need to understand. The first one is that Microsoft is using something called the shared responsibility model. And what we mean with this is that when it comes to well, hosting in Azure, then we have a couple of options. For example, we could be running solutions on-premise, or we can go into Azure. And if we move towards Azure, we have three different ways of being an Azure customer. You could become an infrastructure as a service customer. You could be a platform as a service customer, and you could also become a software as a service customer. And if you would look at, for example, how a data center on-premise is being built, then what you'll see is that if you build your own data centers, then everything starts by building something that we call a fabric. The fabric is basically the physical infrastructure. And that means this is where, for example, storage lives, this is where networking lives, and this is also where your physical servers are. On top of that fabric, typically we will create a layer of virtualization. So, for example, this could be VMware. Now, come on, my mouse is super sensitive, which is super annoying. Sorry for that. I'm gonna try and get that fixed. Oh, you know what? I do have another mouse. Ooh. Let's see if this one is less sensitive. So we put a virtualization layer on top of that. Then in what we'll do is we will create a virtual machine, right? In that virtual machine, we choose to create an operating system. What we in the end want to do is host an application, and some applications, they require something called a platform, which is running on top of the virtual machine, inside the VM, obviously. A platform, for example, if we want to run a web application and the operating system is Linux, then we need, for example, Apache, or we need Nginx to run any web application. If you want to be running databases, you need SQL. Well, there's a layer between the operating system and that what in the end the original goal is. And that goal in the end is, for example, running an application. Now, in an on-prem situation, everything here, everything is the responsibility of the customer. So if we think about, so what we see here, let's put this in orange. All of this is the customer responsibility. And well, the idea behind this responsibility, oh, yep, is that all right? Well, close. Here we go. Which means because Microsoft hasn't got anything to do with this. Obviously, if something breaks, for example, if there's something wrong in the operating system, Microsoft is able to give you some support. But basically, everything here is the customer's responsibility. That means the design, the implementation, but also things like updates, upgrades, configuration, security. Everything is the customer's responsibility. If you are an infrastructure as a service customer, then Microsoft is going to be responsible for this part. Microsoft says, hey, the infrastructure, which is the physical part and the virtualization part, this is what infrastructure as a service is. And this basically means that you will be, Microsoft is responsible for networking and for compute stuff. And compute stuff in this case would be, for example, well, the hosting of the virtualization layer. On top of that, any customer is still responsible for whatever happens inside virtual machines. So customers are responsible for creating the VM, managing the operating system. We're responsible for the platform, which is, for example, a web service. And on top of that, we would still have to create, we create the application. And again, if you think about responsibility, then in orange, this is all the customer's responsibility, right? So this is where the customer is. And the blue part, this is what this here is Microsoft's. This is Microsoft responsibility. And this is basically how things will evolve. For example, if you use a platform as a service component, Microsoft is going to be responsible for everything, including the platform. So this is, for example, in this case, this is the platform as a service component. And then on top of that, the customer is now only responsible for the application that lies on top of that. And if we think about platform as a service components in Azure, we can think about, for example, about app services, container-based services, storage services. We can think about database services. We can think about data-related services, and many more. AI services are nowadays very popular, or machine learning services as well. And there's all kinds of things that in this case, Microsoft is going to take responsibility for. And then, well, if you think about customer responsibility, then it's just this part here. And well, to finish this diagram here, when we think about software as a service, we can basically go and say, hey, everything here is Microsoft's responsibility. When we think about software as a service, we can think, for example, about Office related stuff like Exchange Online, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, that stuff. Or Dynamics, for example, is the security there is also, the Dynamics is also Microsoft's responsibility. But there's also other things like, for example, let's say let's say Azure related software as a service components. And for example, in Azure, you can create something called a Bastion host, which is allowing administrators to remotely manage Windows computers or Linux computers. This is actually a software as a service component. Just as an example, right? So there's many of those. But, well, an Azure Bastion is an example of a software as a service solution in an Azure Resource Manager subscription. And just like that, there is plenty of those. And also here we say, hey, but these are completely Microsoft's responsibility. And that is true when it comes to scalability, when it comes to availability, when it comes to speed and response time. However, Microsoft always says security is always and that's what we call a shared responsibility between customer and Microsoft. And this is pretty much the important message here. Because if we think of it, Microsoft has created for us Microsoft created for us Entra ID for managing users and groups and so on. However, if you fail to enable multi-factor authentication for your users, yeah, then, well, Microsoft's responsibility ends at that point. So security is what we see. Security is what we say is security is always a shared responsibility. Just saying, right? You have to do your part of the job as well. There are a couple of other concepts here. One other concept is if you implement security in a proper way, then there is something called the zero trust model. If you think about security in any way, you will always want to go and think about the zero trust model. And what we mean with that is that we have to assume a couple of things when it comes to when it comes to security in combination with Microsoft related services. Um, if we think about the zero trust model, there's actually a couple of things that we need to do. First of all, we need to verify explicitly. This is actually, if you think about the zero trust model, then it's based on three major principles. And when we think about verify explicitly, is that we want to always authenticate. We will always want to authenticate. This is a difficult word. Authenticate and authorize any kind of activity in Azure. So access to applications, access to data, signing in different locations. We need to verify everything. So that is one major component in the zero trust model. Another is that we want to use least privilege access. This is also a very important one. We want to our users and administrators should work via with the just enough access principles, as well as, if possible, the just in time access. So the idea behind this is that nobody, um, nobody in any place inside your organization should have more access than required for their job descriptions. So when it comes to a simple user, we always want to make sure that a user should never be able to access any kind of data that we don't need access to for being able to do our jobs. And even more so, also, we only want to allow that just enough access at the times that that user needs it. So, for example, if you are a financial officer in an organization, then you should not have access to financial data when you are not when you are not in need for that financial data. So, if possible, we can also create mechanisms to disallow access to financial information until the point that that user needs access to the financial information. And the user could go and say, hey, and this is the time that I need access, and I need this access for like 3 hours. And after those 3 hours, I will be no longer needing that access. So we will then block access to that data again. This sounds like a lot of work. And Microsoft does have a couple of solutions in order to make this happen, not only for administrators, but also for users. So there is something there anyway. Also, there is a third principle in the zero trust model, and that is we need to assume breach. So what we need to do is we need to expect to be hacked. And if we expect to be hacked, so if we are certain that we are under attack, if we assume that, then one of the things that we can do is, for example, we can minimize something called the blast radius. The blast radius is if a hacker attacks something in your environment and it is successful, then how much damage is it able to do? So one of the things that we can do in order to minimize blast radiuses is, for example, by implementing network segmentation, where we want to divide our solutions into smaller pieces. So if one solution has been compromised, it will only be that single solution and nothing else in the organization. If that is possible for you, that is something that you want to do. So you want to minimize your blast radius, and that means you are going to implement you will be implementing segmentation. You want to enable, for example, end-to-end encryption everywhere. So all network traffic should be encrypted. Also, data at rest should be encrypted. We need to set up all kinds of defense components, defense mechanisms to make sure that when we are under attack, we will at least, when we are under attack, we will at least be able to, well, recognize this. And this is what this is what we think of when we think about um, when we think about zero trust. Then this is basically what we will be looking into. So we want to make sure that we do not we don't trust um, anything basically. Um, another principle, another principle when it comes to security and compliance in Microsoft is we want to be also, well, looking at our at our IT infrastructures, and we want to defense our infrastructure in depth. And if we think about defense in depth, then what we pretty much do is we will look into different components in the environment, and we will then defense at every single layer. So, for example, just to give you an idea of what defense in depth could mean, we could, for example, have a user in our organization. Right? This is supposed to look like a user. Let's see. Let's make it a pretty one. So we here, nice user. Let's say this user is using a device in order to be productive. So we want to go to work. In the device, if we connect to the device runs a different kind of client-side applications. So, for example, we could be running, let's say, client app, an app one, and another app could be used for being productive. Now, if a user uses a device and an app to connect, for example, to Office, for example, to email, then this application will, in the end, have to travel over the internet. Well, okay, you know what? I have done this better. Let me just make sure that this cloud looks a little bit more like a cloud. Here we go. So we sort of have to travel over a public space, and then we are connecting to let's say the server side applications. And here, for example, we could be thinking about Exchange Online, or a SharePoint Online, and OneDrive for Business, or Teams, or of course any other application, right? Where and these applications in their turn, they will allow access to what we see organizational data. And then, so if you think about defense in depth, what we want to do is we want to apply security in all possible layers of in all possible layers here. So, for example, when we need to protect the identity here, right? So this is the identity that we want to protect. We need to defend the device that we have. So if there is so if the user is working with a Windows device, or an Android, or an iOS device, or a Mac, or whatever kind of device, we need to be protecting at the device level as well. We need to be protecting the client applications. So here we talk about, this is about protecting the client app. This is this is what we are going to, this is what we call the perimeter. The perimeter means this is the network that allows access to company resources. Also, obviously, we want to be protecting our organizational applications, and we want to be protecting our organizational data. And this is very often called the data estate. Basically, data estate means all the data that we have inside the organization to do everything that we need to do. So here we have all kinds of things. So if we, for example, want to be protecting things for in Azure, then when it comes to protecting identities, we might want to implement multi-factor authentication, because that is a way to protect devices. Oh, sorry, to protect identities. Or when we think about protecting devices, we might want to enable a firewall here, right, on the device. Or we want to enable a storage encryption. For example, we can encrypt storage. Oh, typo. Storage encryption, or we can, for example, make sure that that the device is always up to date. So we want to be managing that device in one way or another, or we want to run antivirus solutions on the device. And this is just a few examples. And when we think about client applications, we might want to go and we want to protect our we want to protect organizational data in the app. For example, by disallowing users to copy by copying text from an organizational application to a non-organizational application. Actually, I think I can show you what that would look like. Let me see if I can do that. What I need to do here is just to give you an idea of what we can do at different levels. Let me just go in and see if I can show you what is happening on my phone. I know this is quite a let's say quite a risky thing to do, but you know, I trust my own skills. So let's see what we can do. This is my phone. Here we are. Oh, that's my girlfriend. And what I can do, for example, is open up Outlook like this. Here I have, for example, an email. Oh, I actually have to renew one of my certifications. So if I would, for example, take some text out of this, out of Outlook, which is organizational data to me, if I take that text and, for example, open LinkedIn, and let's say I want to post some text on LinkedIn like this, then one of the things that I can do here is well, block organizations' data to be pasted into unsafe environments. Like LinkedIn is not an organizational app to me. So this is just a very simplistic form of how we can protect organizational data in client apps. For example, when it comes to the perimeter here, we could, for example, think about blocking certain locations from accessing. So, for example, you could go and say, hey, I don't want anyone who is located in either Russia or in North Korea or any other country that we find scary. We can go and say, hey, we don't want those. We don't want connections to be allowed from a certain location, for example. But we can even do other things like, hey, but what if, for example, the device is a certain client operating system that we want to allow or not allow? Or we can also choose what kind of client applications we want to allow or not allow. So actually here we can go and say, okay, and this may be a little bit, so we can go for all of these things, we can go, are we going to allow uh, or block different kinds of access towards our server applications? And when it comes to the organizational applications, we need to set up authorization. Are users authorized to access a specific are they authorized to access a specific application or not? Are you allowed to sign in into a SharePoint site or in a team? Are you part of a team? This could, for example, be achieved by making use of groups in Azure, for example, or setting up the proper licenses when people are accessing these applications. Or when it comes to the data estate, we might want to go and make sure that we encrypt the data that is being stored. We can manage access to data when it is stored. These kinds of things. And if we think about defense in depth, then pretty much what we need to do is, as the principle of defense in depth is that we need to be able to secure in every single layer that we are that we have the inside the environment that we are running here. So we need to set up MFR, we need to set up device management, we need to protect our applications, we need to set up blocks for certain events, or we need to protect our applications and our data as well. And this is pretty much what we mean with defense in depth. We want to be protecting everything at every single location. Now you can imagine that all of this, all of this is quite a bit of work, and especially if we want to translate this into any Microsoft component in Azure Data Center. So in our tenant, everything that we do in Azure, for example, host Office systems but also virtual machines and databases and networks. If we need to think about these things all of the time, that's quite a bit of work. But this is, in fact, what we need to do. This is how it works. So we need to be very, 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 let's say, careful with that. So one of the things that we need in order to protect things, one of the things that we see happening a lot is we see encryption happening a lot. We can encrypt content in order to make sure that third parties are not able to read our secrets. So the idea about encryption is, for example, that we can have a original document here. So we have a document or something or some kind of info. We can then feed this document into an encryption algorithm, which is an encryption algorithm that is it rhythm? Algorithm. I think without the H, but I'm not sure anymore. Well, anyway, in algorithm. Now I cannot. Well, I have to check. Algorithm. Oh, it's with an H. Good to know. So I wanted to make sure that I don't do any typos. So algorithm. Here we are. So we have an encryption algorithm, which is like a mathematical calculation against the data, plus an encryption key, which makes the algorithm unique. And the idea behind this is that then what we have in the end is the same data, but now this data is unreadable to anyone. As long if you have the key, you can read it, right? That's the idea. Now, different algorithms do encryption. Basically, we can go and say, hey, there is when it comes to this, we have something called symmetric encryption. Then there is just one key to encrypt and decrypt, and asymmetric encryption has two keys. One key to encrypt and the other key to decrypt. So, for example, PKI infrastructures is two keys. Or, for example, my certificate that I am running on my mobile website is a two-key solution. It has a public key and a private key. But what we can do is let's say, if we want, this is where we do the encryption part. Obviously, if we encrypted data, we might also want to, decrypt. So the decryption part is where we take that encrypted, data, run it again in the algorithm, right? We can put it in the algorithm here again, add that key in, and the result will be that we are now able to see what kind of content we have encrypted in the first place. So that would give me the same data again. Okay, I know it's a little bit different. My lines are difficult to sort of reproduce, but it's the same data. And in a two-key scenario, you can have, for example, key number 1 to encrypt and key number 2 to decrypt, for example. That is in a 2-key scenario. That is one thing. Another thing that is quite normal in IT when it comes to security is something called hashing. And the idea behind hashing is that we can have an original piece of data. So let's say we have a piece of data like this. We can then put that data again into an algorithm. However, this is a different type of algorithm. This is a hashing algorithm, also coming with a key. Then the result will be that the data is again not able to be read by anyone. So here we have like the encrypted form of that data. And the idea about the decryption here, if you want to do the decryption in hashing, then what we can say is that there is no way to do so. So decryption does not exist here. So you could question yourself, when is this useful? Well, this could be a useful technique if we want to verify that two different parties know the same thing. So for example, passwords, when we verify passwords, when we sign in, we use hashing algorithms. So I enter the password, it will be hashed. The party that is going to verify if I know the password is also they also have a hash of the password. We can match if we have the same hash, and if we have the same hash, we know the same password. We don't know what the actual password is. We never exchange that information, but we know we have the same one. That is what what hashing is about when it comes to that part. Just a couple of concepts that we can be looking into. And when we think about this is all about security. And one of the things that is, if we think about compliance, in general, we can say that there might be governments. There might be governments. There also might be what we call industries that have all kinds of rules, or let's say rules, or regulations in place that are about IT security. And if you work in a certain government, or if you are, for example, in Europe, then we have the European Union, and that government component has made up all kinds of rules in how we should treat data and how we should treat IT. And in some cases, we have some industry-specific regulations that we need to be following, maybe because of financial information or healthcare information and so on. So when we think about compliance, this is more about following rules and regulations in order to, be compliant with those rules. Examples are, for example, we have, for example, GDPR is very well known, or ISO 27001 is a very well known compliance regulation set, or HIPAA is something that is in the United States, where when it comes to healthcare information, and so many more, all kinds of compliance and things we need to follow in order to be compliant with those rules. In some industries, it is mandatory to follow those rules, and in some industries, it is sort of beneficial to do so. So you can prove to, for example, your customers that you have been looking into IT security in a proper way. This is sort of the sort of a starting point when it comes to security and compliance. These are things that we might want to go and enable, or at least follow up into when it comes to enabling security and compliance in Azure. Now, Microsoft actually has something pretty nice that you can check out. It is a website called Microsoft has created something called, and I always forget the name. Microsoft has something called the what is it called? The Microsoft Cyber Security Reference Architectures. Architectures. This is a pretty much some documentation, the MCRA. It's documentation about all of these different things. And this describes security and security in Microsoft 365 and Azure. And you can get access to it if you follow this link, aka.ms/MCRA. Let me show you what this is, because this is actually quite a useful resource, aka .ms/MCRA. This is basically what it is. And what you can do is you can download stuff here. Let me see if I can here download the 2023 version of the MCRA, and this is a PowerPoint file. And you can download this. This is what it is, and this is 95 different slides on security in Azure. So this or in Microsoft 365. So they talk about, for example, end-to-end security. They talk about the architecture, the threats, compliance, different things, the security adoption framework. So what are the steps that we need to take in security? And if you just move forward here, then it will basically explain security in a certain way here. You can download the file as a whole. It's not too big actually, and you know what? Let's open it up from a PowerPoint, because it's a little bit more responsive. So here we are. This is the entire PowerPoint here, and what you can see is, for example, it comes with some explanations on things. So how do attackers work? And it will explain a little bit where you want to do your protection, which basically means everywhere. And then what you'll see is, for example, it explains the zero trust things. It explains what a SOC is. And if you go further in that PowerPoint, it shows, for example, all kinds of parts that we can use. This is sort of this is all kinds of links to all kinds of resources that might be interesting. And actually, the one thing that I like the most here, let me see if this is the one. Yeah, here, for example, here we can see, hey, where in Azure is Microsoft actually doing zero trust, right? So, and here we can see all kinds of things like, for example, Microsoft 365 as a service with all kinds of Defender products, but also when it comes to Entra ID and user configurations, Intune for device management, Defender for endpoint for device protection, and so on. So there's all kinds of components here, and then Microsoft even has pictures like this, like, hey, what are all the different security related products in Azure? So what do we have, and what is the purpose of these? And if you would show this in an actual presentation, what you'll see is you will be able to also click on links, these little links, and they will take you to informational pages. So it's actually quite a nice way to look at security from an architectural perspective. So if you're interested, you can just go into aka.ms/MCRA, and that will give you access to that complete cybersecurity reference architecture guide. So this is our second picture. Let's say this is the security. What is this for a difficult word? Security concepts. Let's say there's some concepts that we need to be aware of in order to be able to do things right. All right, it is now 10:15. What I want to suggest